From the bustling harbors of Alexandria to the sun-baked fortresses on the cataracts of the Nile, Egypt was Roman for 600 years. Through all those centuries of imperial control, it was set apart from the other provinces by its isolation, by its vast wealth, and by its ancient culture. Egypt remains in a category of its own for Roman historians today, since it is, by a vast margin, the best documented part of the Roman Empire. Egypt's arid climate has preserved tens of thousands of papyri, bits of scrap paper with texts of every conceivable kind, from lyric poetry to tax receipts. These allow us to follow disputes between landlords and tenants, to track the progress of plagues and rebellions, and, most relevantly for our purposes, to read the minutes of court cases, which describe crimes ranging from petty theft to murder. This video, which is sponsored by NordVPN, will explore the so-called Aphrodito murder mystery, arguably the most dramatic and intriguing of all the court cases in Egyptian papyri of the Roman era. Before we investigate that case, however, I'd like to talk briefly about the more general topic of crime in Roman Egypt. Theft is the most common crime reported in papyri. One man went away to a funeral and returned to find his house stripped bare. Another was at home when he was robbed, and was beaten by the burglars when he tried to stop them. A third man recognized the thieves who ransacked his house as his ex-wife and mother-in-law. Thieves entered one dwelling by carefully pulling all the nails from the door. A less subtle pair used a log to batter down a bricked-up window, and then lowered sacks of grain from the building's second story with a rope. Occasionally, we read about more organized crime. In one instance, a man was robbed of 2 donkeys and recruited the police chief of his village to help him recover them. When they tracked the donkeys into a neighboring town, however, the town police, who had been paid off by the thieves, threw the man into prison and beat him. As far as we know, the donkeys were never recovered. Although full-scale skirmishes sometimes took place between the inhabitants of rival villages, murders are seldom mentioned. An exception to this rule is a document describing a court case in which 4 men were accused of murder. During the trial, however, the witnesses for the prosecution refused to testify, apparently because they had been intimidated by the defendants. Another intriguing example comes from a 4th century papyrus that presents a series of stylized court cases. One of these, which may be fictional or at least reshaped for literary effect, involves the murder of a prostitute by a rich and powerful member of the Alexandrian city council. Despite the efforts of his cronies, the councilman is arrested and brought to trial. He has a dramatic confrontation with the prostitute's mother, confesses to the crime, and is sentenced to death by beheading. Finally, though it's not a papyrus, we may have additional evidence for murder in Roman Egypt in the erstwhile person of Artemidorus, a mummy on exhibit in the British Museum. This man, who died during the 2nd century, was buried in a traditional mummy case with a realistic Greek-style portrait, shown here. CT scanning has revealed that the back of the mummy's head was crushed, apparently by blows with a blunt instrument. While it's possible that the damage occurred during the embalming process, it's at least equally likely that we're dealing with foul play. Before we launch into the Aphrodito murder mystery, a quick word about this video's sponsor, NordVPN. In Roman Egypt, security meant armed guards and strong doors. Online security, of course, is a bit more complex, especially when you're in public places or traveling. That is where NordVPN comes in, using state-of-the-art encryption to protect your internet connection and personal data wherever you go. Nord also guards your privacy on your home server, constantly defending your data from cyber attacks and adware alike. Use the link shown on screen, which you'll also find in the video description, to save on a 2-year plan with 1 additional month free. Now, at last, the long-awaited murder mystery. In 1905, a man in a small Egyptian village was renovating his house when a wall collapsed, revealing a void in the earth beneath. Heaps of papyri were visible at the bottom of the pit. Many of these were sold to dealers and dispersed before the Government Antiquities Service could intervene. When archaeologists finally arrived, they discovered additional papyri, including a huge mass of documents that had belonged to a lawyer, landowner, and amateur poet named Dioscorus. Among Dioscorus' papers was the transcript from a trial that took place sometime in the mid-6th century. This document, on 2 fragmentary sheets, found its way into the papyrology collection of the University of Michigan, where it was finally edited and published in 1977. Large parts of the transcript are lost, and what remains is difficult to interpret. It is clear, however, that the court case involved conspiracy, bribery, and at least 2 brutal murders, all in the little village of Aphrodito. The defendants in the case were Menas, a soldier, and the aristocrat Serapamon. Menas was accused of savagely beating a priest with the wooden handle of an irrigation device. The mortally wounded priest, left lying in a field, was discovered still alive and lingered long enough to identify his assailant. Menas was also said to have arranged, with Serapamon, the death of a villager. This man was brought into custody by the heads of the village guilds, plied with wine, and then stabbed to death. His body was cremated in secrecy, and the bones were hidden. In court, the accused men denied everything. Menas claimed that he had been out of town at the time of the priest's murder, and that the priest had died of natural causes. The dead villager, according to Serapamon, had not been killed on his orders, but by the village headmen themselves, who knew that the man was going to inform on them for some misdeed. Both Menas and Serapamon denied receiving or dispensing any money in connection with their alleged crimes. So what was going on here? One scholar interpreted the murders as an expression of disputes among the village's Christian community. It seems more likely, however, that both the priest and the villager were killed because they knew too much about the schemes of Menas and Serapamon, which probably centered on some sort of embezzlement. We have no idea how the trial turned out, and are in no position to solve the mystery. But, if nothing else, the case brings a village in late Roman Egypt to life, briefly and brilliantly, before the curtain of 15 centuries drops, and we're left in the dark again. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting Told in Stone on Patreon. You might also be interested in my book, Naked Statues, Fat Gladiators, and War Elephants. Thanks for watching.